Hi, everybody. What I want to talk about today is something that's very personal and close in my life. And I found out later, after activities in my life where I was close and did not know the full extent of what I knew and who I was working with. But here, I'm going to share it with you. It's very interesting. This is about Dr. Ewen Cameron. But Ewen Cameron, okay, let's look at the Donald Ewen Cameron, known as Ewen Cameron or Ewen Cameron, was Scottish-born psychiatrist who served as president of the American Psychiatric Association from 1952 to 1953, Canadian Psychiatric Association 1958-1959. Before I go on, let me tell you, I worked with his daughter. I know his daughter. I'm friends with his daughter. She's a joy of a person to be around. She was wonderful to work with. And when I read now these things about Ewen Cameron, when things come up about MK Ultra or the psychiatric experiments or people being abused in Canada in MK Ultra programs, and I'm just like amazed, because when I met her, she had told me, I showed you in a previous video where I worked with neurosurgeons and I worked with neuromodulation and changing frequencies in the brain for movement disorders, depression, dystonia, pain, and other things. When I met her, the reason why I have the picture of the Sydney Opera House here is because when I met her, I'm not going to say her name, because I can't find it online anyway, so I think she's protected. So she's a friend of mine on LinkedIn. I have her phone number. I have her cell number. I've traveled with her all around the world. I met her in Sydney. I've been to Argentina with her. I've been in Europe. I've been in Germany. I've been in Austria. Did we go to Asia? We may have been in Bangkok together. But anyway, we were working on deep brain research. We worked for a public company which does neuromodulation and puts electrodes in the brain. We were working on where you would drill a hole the size in the cranium, about the size of a nickel, and drive an electrode, say 7 or 8 inches long, into the head. But you would use imaging from all of the best, MRI, X-ray, all of the advanced imaging they had. They had heat sensing, they could map a 3D image of your brain with blood vessels and everything, so that when they put a needle in there to introduce an electrode or a catheter, they would be able to miss all of the major arteries and things like that, not cause an aneurysm or something like that during brain surgery. I've been in gamma knife surgery where they remove and excise tumors with radiation from these big steel honed out mushroom dome looking structures that are about 6-7 feet in diameter. And in the back, they're behind these lead-plated glass windows in an imaging suite where they can see the patient in there and the whole brain laid out. But so anyway, that's what I worked on with his daughter. And we were working with patients in Argentina. I remember we had one patient who thought gravity was going to turn off and he was going to fly into space. And he had a paranoid condition where he could not function in life, and they were going to try to put an electrode in his brain to shut off the frequency that was overreacting, because usually it's a modulation problem. It's either chemical or electrical at the site of that neuron cluster that controls that form of behavior that affects you. So when I remember I met her on a boat, we were on a ferry tour in Sydney Harbor. And we had been working on this project, and it was a world conference of neurosurgery or something like that. And our company was having a tour, and we had several clients invited. We went up on the 3rd deck, and then we were looking at stars and looking around the harbor as the ferry went around doing the harbor tour. Kind of like the, what is it called, the Circle 9 tour around New York. And we were talking, I just met her, and she had mentioned her father was a prominent psychiatrist from McGill. And she came from Canada, and she was from McGill, and she's a biomedical engineer, and she works in deep brain neuromodulation. So she's a joy of a person to work with. I mean, everything she did. I mean, we would be in Brazil. We swam in rivers. We did canoeing and extreme sports on our off time. I mean, she's down with anything. I mean, she's like super athletic, has kids, married, just a wonderful, always has a super work ethic, was always working hard. And we were looking for patients for what you call feasibility studies, where you want to see if your idea and your product and your device work. You have to find the first patients that will try it. And some of these patients have gotten to the last phase of their options where nothing will improve their life until they try something drastic, you know. So what did you and Cameron do? You know, besides all of his, what I think is said on on Wikipedia is perhaps a little more negative than what he actually did, but he may have had people around him or surrounding him that were part of the circles of espionage. Society of Biological Psychiatry, in spite of his high professional reputation, he's been criticized for his experimentation on adults and children, as well as an involvement in sexual abuse, administering electroconvulsive therapy and experimental drugs, including poisons such as curare. That's the frog poison from Hanama Bay not Hanama Bay. I went there. It's where Angel Falls is in Venezuela. Canaima. It's called Canaima. I've been there. I've got pictures of Canaima. I've seen the frogs. Without their conformed consent, his role in the history of the development of psychological and medical torture techniques. Some of his work took place in the context of Project MKUltra program for the developing of mind control and torture techniques, psychoactive poisons, and behavior modification systems. Decades after his own death, the psychic driving technique he developed continued to see extensive use in the torture of prisoners around the world. Just judging by working from his daughter, I cannot imagine this guy. If he ever, doesn't have it all, any of the symptoms or anything you would see of some of these people that come out about having been raised in Illuminati families and torture. She's just a wonderful person. Biomedical engineer, always dedicated to her work, always discovering things, always pushing forward. Fun to be around. Super hard worker. That's what I compare with when I'm reading about her father. Cameron began his training in psychiatry at Glasgow, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then it goes down. I'm going to show you. I'm just going to make this short. The Nuremberg trials. In 1945, Cameron, their diagnosis was amnesia by Historia, a short commentary in the JAMA. That's the Journal of American Medicine. That's important. If it's in there, then it's word. Before his arrival in Nuremberg, Cameron had written The Social Reorganization of Germany, in which he argued that German culture and its individual citizens would have to be transformed and recognized in his analysis. I had no idea. I'm going to tell you something as a truther, if you're still here. Listen to this story. When I was on with her on that ferry, I remember I was married at the time. I have 4 kids, and I was very, very Mormon, and I was very into my religion. And I remember talking with her, and we got to the subject of religion, and I talked about going to church, and she just went, and she looked at me, and I remember that was the first person in my life that ever taught me through just a visual communication in second that, oh, you still believe in religion. And it caused me to think, like, she knows something way beyond what I know. So I knew in that moment, it was kind of a connection thing. But I think she was obviously has a lot of knowledge and was raised near this stuff or in it, but she doesn't look at all or act like any person that was ever put in MKUltra herself. Maybe her father did these things to other people and he could be in it. It sure seems like social and interest psychic behavior analysis. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Cameron continued his work on memory and its relationship to aging. Published a book called Remembering and Extended Psychiatric Links to Human Biology. He began to develop the discipline of social psychiatry, which concentrated on the roles of interpersonal interaction, family, community. Cameron began to abandon the Freudian unconscious in favor of a social constructivist view of mental illness. Sounds positive. Cameron and Freud, Civilization and Discontents. Although Cameron rejected the Freudian notion of unconscious, he shared the Freudian idea that personal psychology is linked to the nervous nature. He theorized that attitudes and beliefs should be reinforced in the overall attitudes of the desired society. Like Freud, Cameron, tickles me to say her last name, maintained that the family was the nucleus of social behavior and anxieties later in life were spawned during childhood. Okay, Cameron and the Germans, if we can succeed in inventing means of changing their attitudes and beliefs, we shall find ourselves in possession of measures which, if wisely used, may be employed in freeing ourselves from their attitudes and beliefs in other fields which have greatly contributed to the instability of our period by their propensity for holding up progress. Mental illness is a social contagion. I'm not going to go deep, guys. This is a shorter video. MK Ultra Subproject 68. During the 1950s and 60s, Cameron became involved in what was later become known as the MK Ultra Mind Control Program, which is covertly sponsored by the Central Intelligence Agency, and which eventually led to the publication of the KUBARK Counterintelligence Interrogation Manual. Cameron's work was funded under MK Ultra Subproject 68. He is unrelated to another CIA psychiatrist, Alan Cameron, who helped pioneer psychological profiling in the world leaders during the 1970s. It was not associated with the behavioral modification research program. Cameron had been hoping to correct schizophrenia by erasing existing memories and reprogramming the psyche. He commuted from Albany to Montreal every week to work at McGill's Allen Memorial Institute and was paid $69,000 a year from 1957 and 1964 to carry out MK Ultra experiments, where known as the Montreal experiments. In addition to LSD, he experimented with various paralytic drugs and electroconvulsive therapy at 30 to 40 times the normal power. His psychic driving experiments consisted of putting a subject into a drug-induced coma for weeks at a time, up to 3 months in one case, while playing tape loops of a noise and simple statements. These experiments were typically carried out on patients who entered the institute for minor problems such as anxiety disorders or postnatal depression. Many suffered permanent debilitation after these treatments. Such consequences included incontinence, amnesia, forgetting how to talk, forgetting their parents, and thinking their interrogators were their parents. His work was inspired and parallel to the psychiatrist William Sargent, who was also involved in the intelligence services and experimented extensively on his patients, maybe his parents too, without their consent, causing similar long-term this is too nasty to read. This guy did a lot of stuff. I don't think his daughter knows all of this, or knew at the time I worked with her. It was only 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were looking for patients for feasibility studies for deep brain electrodes together in neuromodulation. And now you know where she got her background. Maybe her father taught her good stuff, didn't abuse her, but he was certainly involved in some stuff. So thank you for coming to Play Mundane Show. That's just what I wanted to share. If you're the daughter of Ewen Cameron and you see this and you know me, I love you. Let's chat sometime. I'll give you a call. Message me on LinkedIn or call me. All right. Please hit like, subscribe.